Hi everyone, I'm Dean. I'm the Managing Director of Urban Grow and Grant Horticulture, which is our sister landscaping company. And I'm joined today by Callum, our Senior Designer from Grant Horticulture. And the topic of conversation today is what's in and what's out for gardening 2025. Should we go? Let's start with what's out, and we'll go from there. I think what's out for me, I think it has to be stuff like pack bedding, sort of has to be on the decline, given the use of peat, and it's just throwaway.
I totally agree. Yeah, it seems to be much more about sustainable planting that can come back every year, perennials, as opposed to anything annual or biennials. Items that you can reuse and that you could perhaps even containerize and bring indoors over winter, something like that, like palms or something slightly more exotic.
Yeah, because there's no reason, talking of palms, that you can't overwinter them if you're lucky enough to have some indoor space. Exactly. You don't have to have an orangery. Nice if you do, but
we'd all like
and that's they give a real lush, exotic feel to borders in the summer months. You can keep them in a pot, just place them outside, even if it's just outside your door.
Perfect.
Really good.
I mean, they make great seasonal plants, and they're great borders. I think just thinking about things that are out and that are clearly out, with the current trend towards more naturalistic style planting and natural materials, the counter to that is mass-produced goods and imported goods that perhaps you could source locally for, albeit perhaps a slightly increased fee, but at less a burden to the planet, which seems to be the way to go.
Yeah, and a big one for me on that is Indian sandstone. It's the cheapest paving product on the planet. However, there's a cost somewhere down the line. You know, as the name suggests, it's from India.
Absolutely.
So it's then shipped halfway around the world.
Yeah, and we produce some great sandstone. English sandstone is one of the best around, and
if you can't afford English sandstone, or it's too tricky for you to lay, then use a reconstituted concrete products that are becoming all the rage. So crushed, recycled materials being repurposed.
Yeah, that's a good point with repurposing. I think the idea of sort of repurposing materials within a garden once you're in the throes of a build as well is a great idea. So not shipping so much stuff out in containers, not putting so much stuff back out to skips, repurposing some of the soil, some of the substrates, some of your harder materials that you're bringing out. We've seen people from previous shows at Tatton Park, for example, reusing trees that have been felled in the gardens. And, there's this whole ethos now of sort of reusing what you can from the garden, from the build, which seems to make great sense instead of filling landfill, which just seems pointless, doesn't it?
And I think over time, historically, it was cheaper to rip up someone's old patio, throw it into a skip, forget about it. Now it's like, no, that has a massive negative impact.
Absolutely.
It's like, and now you see landscapers crushing up old patio. If that patio is no good and can't be reused, it's being crushed up and used as a substrate, as hardcore.
Exactly.
So why throw that hardcore away to then bring more back in?
I mean, there's also a cost benefit to the client. It's like you're bringing less materials on site, so it costs less, which it's a double win really for the client, which is great.
I think now tipping waste product is prohibitively expensive, so it makes financial sense to reuse that. And I think what's out, I think I'm so pleased to see that ornamental cabbages are out and long gone, but they do run the risk now. They've been out for so long that maybe they might make a comeback.
Yeah, they'll come back around, won't they? They will.
Well, I really hope not. Scarred for life seeing those used. I think colour-wise, I'm trying to think of a colour that's no longer sort of in use as much, but colours that are in, but earthy colours are always forever popular, aren't they? Perennials.
Pastel colours are always great. Sort of pastel peaches, your pastel pinks, your pastel sort of blues, they're all still in. And you think about there seems to be less of a trend for sort of bright colours, for sort of pops of colour. You think about the magentas and the bright pinks and the fuchsias. You see, or I think I see less of them in gardens nowadays. And I think it's more about the sort of slightly muted palettes and letting the greens and the whites and the browns of the tree trunks do the work.
Let the foliage, flowers last weeks, whereas the foliage is there all season.
Yeah, exactly.
So utilise foliage and the colour in the garden. I think that's a good win.
Yeah, it's funny with colour, isn't it? Because you think that it's, I think definitely the pinks are just, they're out.
They are.
I don't like using them anyway.
I think pale pinks are just about passable, aren't they? And a pale yellow can just about be acceptable.
Maybe.
And I think the irises now that appear at Chelsea, I don't know how you describe that colour, where there's sort of like tonal varieties within the same flower. Always look beautiful, and they seem to be becoming ever popular.
They do. Yeah. I think. So perhaps should we move on to things that are in trend?
Yes, let's. Yes,
that's a nice segue, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've spoke a lot about colour and trends in the garden, what's out. I think sort of what's now in trend. I think let's touch on some more positives. Now we've sort
Yeah.
of given the cabbage a bash, and
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think if we go back to sort of like the RHS shows, and you think about the new category, well, a couple of years old now, with the container gardens and container planting for smaller spaces, for areas that are more urban, balconies perhaps, patios. It just goes to show what you can create in a small space by using a clever array of different containers, whether that be Corten steel, whether it be powder-coated aluminium, whether it be galvanized steel. You know, there's all sorts of different options. Try not to use plastic, but
yeah, I think avoid plastic, isn't it? Because not only that, the sort of more natural, sort of earthy products always look better and more in keeping,
Yeah.
and age better. But I think with planting in containers, you know, lots of people have balcony gardens. Don't be afraid of the size of plants you can actually plant. There's
Yeah,
nothing stopping you planting shrubs in
great point.
containers.
Yeah, or small trees. You know, small trees with a seasonal display beneath them that you can keep changing through the seasons, or, you know, they're really great for trailers as well, for trailing plants, trailing
Yeah.
rosemaries or erigerons, or, you know, something that's just going to cover and soften the side of the container. It is really lovely.
And yeah, great for wildlife as well. And I think also you've touched on rosemary and erigeron, both plants that like really hot, dry conditions.
Yeah.
So when you are planting a container, think about the needs of all the plants you're planting. So you keep it to all Mediterranean planting or all water-loving plants. Yeah, don't try and mix the two because it never ends well.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, I think going back to what's out, which is unnatural materials, if you like. I think natural materials are obviously very in.
Yeah.
So the use of stone, the use of gravels, the use of stone sets and clay pavers, all you can find in the UK, really well made by local producers from local quarries, and you really ought to be sourcing from the UK if you're going to be buying these hard materials, because there's absolutely no reason why you should be importing those from.
No.
You know, China, India, Spain, all those places. You know, we produce great materials and we should use them.
Absolutely.